Every week, Howie and I go through the archives to see what we can pull out and find that might have some kind of social or newsworthy relevance as to what's going on in today's world. We came across this interview of Allen Ginsberg. And for those of you under the age of 50 who may not have heard or know who Allen Ginsberg was, he, along with Jack Kerouac and William Burroughs, founded the Beat Generation. And you've heard the term Beatniks, I'm sure, and that's where that came from. These guys were writers and poets who basically through their literary works rebelled against this country's materialistic and racist culture, as well as the suppression of freedom of speech and sexual expression. Mary Reynard, who arranged and conducted this interview, was one of many individuals who volunteered for the Earth Network. And under Howie's direction, they produced, shot, and edited a wide range of social, global, and human stories that they were very passionate about. In that same spirit, Howie, Christian, and myself have decided to resurrect the underground news. We feel it's important to know the past so that you can understand the present, and then maybe do something about it that will affect your future. So listen to Allen Ginsberg here, and even though this was 1991, I think a lot of it could apply to 2020.
It was July 3rd, 1991. I was traveling through Boulder, Colorado, where I was fortunate enough to meet and talk with renowned poet Allen Ginsberg.
Tomorrow is July 4th, and I wonder what I think about the fireworks and what they symbolize. They do symbolize liberation, the fight for liberation. They also have come more and more to symbolize bombs bursting in air, war, and they've also come to symbolize just high times and having a lot of high-tech fireworks and a big spectacle where everybody says, ah, and a picnic. And in America, nationalism seems to be total chauvinism at this point. An unmitigated pride, vanity, accompanied by great aggression. And the erosion of liberty. I mean, it seems to be the people that wrap themselves in the flag of nationalism that seem to be the greatest aggressors on the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Then in addition, there have been an attempt to destabilize and dismantle the Constitution and the First Amendment, I believe, guaranteeing free speech, by amending that so that you can't demonstrate opposition to the government by burning the flag. So it's like substituting a shadow or symbol of the Constitution for the actual Constitution and then trying to destroy the Constitution when Bush proposed a constitutional amendment to prohibit flag burning. So that's kind of weird. Yeah. It's an Orwellian double talk, come to total upfront practice. And hardly anybody seemed to notice.
Do you think that there's a general lack of awareness politically in our society? Even on the 4th of July, are people aware of what it is they're celebrating?
I think there's a great deal of awareness that it's a nationalistic holiday, and I think the people here will be celebrating it as a family grassroots day rather than as a nationalistic chauvinist day, though I don't know what, obviously over the rest of the country, all the instruments and propaganda machines will be making it a celebrate our victory in Iraq occasion, and trying to make it into a nationalistic occasion. But the question that we were focusing on was how are the same people who are trying to be nationalistic, who are nationalist chauvinist, how are they undermining the foundations of democracy? So there is a huge attack on communication in America and free speech, blockading communication in many levels beside by the same people, beside the flag business, flag burning. Like Senator Helms has put in a law, which was signed by Reagan, which has knocked all my poetry off the air, radio and television, a law directing the FCC to ban all indecent speech 24 hours a day. Well, that law has just been struck down as unconstitutional in an appeal that was carried by the American Civil Liberties Union and the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee and the Penn Club and William Burroughs and other poets. But the government may appeal that. But they did try to stamp out free expression in the air, which would meant telephones, electronics, TV, everything. They've just forbidden doctors to discuss abortion, doctors in government clinics, or clinics that are supported by the government. So they've interfered with medical prerogatives, as they had all along anyway with the drug problem, where they've got in between the patient and the doctor and driven medical practice out of the drug area so that doctors no longer can try and cure or maintain addicts. There have been all sorts of government attacks on photography, as with the Mapplethorpe through the NEA, thing parallel to the FCC laws, usually Senator Helms.
With the rampages of Senator Helms and with the media censorship that we just experienced in the Gulf War, do you think that censorship is ever appropriate?
Any kind of censorship is some sort of control mechanism, attempt to control other people's minds. But on many other levels, like in subsidizing all these wars, it's meant the destruction of communications centers like libraries, schools, programs that involve people getting active and participating in democratic decision-making and voting, cutting down on legal aid for poor people. So there's an enormous, many instances of it. I mean, you can't even communicate sexually in your house without being guilty of sodomy. It's now a big, there's a new Supreme Court decision that they can invade your house and seize pornography if they want, child porn, even if you didn't make it, even if you didn't buy it, even if you're not selling it, just possession. So there's on every level a destruction of democratic prerogatives under the new neoconservative administration. And the Supreme Court seems to be getting more solidified into that area. Can't even people on death row, if their lawyers make mistakes, they can't appeal. It's no longer a reason. So that's another blockage of communication. You know, you can't communicate to the court if there's been a big error of judgment.
Does this include exclusion of the feminine principle in favor of masculine rational thought?
No, I think it's operating out of totally emotional, blind, irrational rationalization. It has nothing to do with rationality.
Motivated by what?
Will to dominate, censor, and control. Control addiction, as Burroughs pointed out years ago.
Control addiction.
Control addiction. Power, and power is more of a habit than any drug. It seems to transform men into emotionally violent creatures. You know, like Bush wanting to kick Saddam Hussein's ass publicly, or taking it very personally when Noriega double crosses him on their mutual dope dealing, you know, taking it as a big personal affront and wanting to send thousands of people off to die for this insult. I don't think it's the masculine rationality versus feminine emotionalism at all. I think it's masculine irrational emotionalism. I mean, men are just emotional as women. It's just that, you know, their emotions are very often different.
Well,
they're very soft, actually.
By the feminine principle, I don't necessarily mean emotional. I mean intuitive and.
No, it's the same bullshit on both sides. I think men are intuitive, women are intuitive. Everybody's intuitive. It's just that men have got this thing going where they got the power. and where they sort of addicted to it, and they've solidified and hardened under it. And women have never had a chance to harden under it. Give them a chance, they'll get hard enough. Look at Jenny Kirkpatrick at the UN. Look at Madame Nu. Look at Imelda Marcos. Look at any woman who's got real power. The same hook or crook or murder that men have gotten. They're the same.
Is control addiction the result of ego empowerment rather than spiritual empowerment?
A bunch of blather. To be a little specific, how could you encourage some spiritual reconciliation between the Arabs, the Palestinians, and the Zionists? I was thinking of that this morning while meditating. They never can talk together. They're just too idiotic, all of them. One thing, the first step might be for them to get together physically in one place and not talk. Just be there together physically for, get sort of a large, massive population day by day sitting all afternoon together without discussing matters, just being there. I know, not meditating formally, just being there and having to shut up and having to endure their own bodies and endure their own minds and endure each other's minds and bodies in one place. It'd be kind of an interesting thing to try.
Yeah, it sure would.
That might apply for any of these dissenting mad groups, that actually have to sit. It would be great, to have all the homosexuals and bohemians and artists just sit down with Jesse Helms and his cohort of fundamentalist monsters, and after everybody just sit together under the Washington Monument, not saying anything and not arguing and not trying to solve anything, just being there.
Would they breathe together?
Well, I don't want to make it too specific or meditative because then it gets too much like, the advantage of the Buddhists or something. But just being together, silent, might be interesting. Because it's something that's totally neutral. And nobody could, argue that somebody's got an advantage. That might be an interesting thing. I was just thinking it this morning. When the Roshi, or the Zen fellow that was leading the meditation this morning, said, thanks for having the patience to sit here together, all of us. And so, well, that patience is really a thing, a real thing. And how could you encourage that kind of patience? You couldn't tell them to go meditate, but you could tell them, you could tell blacks and whites or whoever the contending groups are, the fundamentalists or the God lovers, the flag wavers, to sit together with the flag burners and just not do anything. Might be interesting. If they could stand each other. After a while they realized they could stand each other.
Earlier you said to me that monotheism is mental fascism and that the religions and constructs arising from it are the curse of the planet, the cause of conflict and war. Do you believe in God?
Absolutely not. And I don't think any of these substitute words are any good either, but if you don't use God. The nearest I would get to say is because there's no God, everything is sacred. I.e., this is it. There's no God, but this is it.
Do you believe that everything is God?
No! Don't drag that dirty old dog in again. I keep trying to tell you. It's a mind-bending piece of verbal blather. If you can get rid of the idea of God, you might find the grass blade sacred in itself without the need of anything else. Things are symbols of themselves, and you might empower the grass blade, but if you're going to say the grass blade is God, you're taking all the power away from the grass blade again.
Is that what you meant by your poem, Holy, Holy, Holy?
No, I was saying, at that time, I was a deluded idiot thinking that there was a God.
Oh, okay.
And I was trying to base it on that. Fortunately, I was a little evasive about it so that it could be applied to non-theistic attitude also. My instincts were right, but my vocabulary was faulty.
You've been a Buddhist for 25 years. Does Buddhism acknowledge a connection to creation? What is your view of creation?
The grass blade's empty. Okay. Instead of full of schmirchy feeling, the grass blade is empty in itself, and it's standing up there empty and completely real, and doesn't need a reference outside of itself. Me too. I'm completely empty and completely real, and I don't need a reference outside of myself.
What about our culture's reality? Do we want authority figures? Are we heading towards totalitarianism?
They want a god, they want a dictator, they want a Bush, they want a Jesse Helms apparently, they want an Ayatollah, they want somebody to solve their problems for them.
Do you have any idea why? What is it in here?
The overpopulation, stress that's insoluble. Nobody can get adequate mental treatment or medical treatment or food in the world anymore. Like 1 billion people, a quarter of the world is malnourished and starving. The cities are overpopulated. People have to move out into sandbars and get hit by typhoons in Bengal. There's no room anymore, and everybody's waste and detritus and excrement is fouling the oceans and the air. The high-tech civilization is destroying its own substrate. Species are disappearing. Amenities are disappearing. The garbage is no longer being collected in New York properly. And the recycling that was started a year ago has been stopped by budget cuts. Schooling has gone down. Too many kids in the classroom. The whole situation from China through United States, high-tech, low-tech, is all degenerating.
So what is the alternative?
Well, Gary Snyder, in his recent book, Practice of the Wild, points out that the Earth can support about 1/10 of the present human population before its expansion is an aggression on other sentient forms, vegetables, animals, minerals, birds. So we probably have to cut down to about 1/10 of the present planetary population, according to him. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that sounds sort of right. Sounds like, everybody's complaining, everybody's overcrowded, you can't find a parking place.
So are we heading for a calamity of some kind, for some kind of a blow-up?
Everybody says, well, there'll be a, the ozone layer, or the heavens torn to rags with acid rain, or a Chernobyl, or some natural catastrophes, like people wiped out by typhoons because they're living in the wrong place, or desertification. So it looks like there's some karmic fallout is due, presumably.
Now, when you say
And we already have all these little wars that cut down, we killed 150,000 people minimum in Iraq the other day without noticing it, in the Nintendo television war. Maybe also in the advanced cultures, technology, television itself is an instrument of desensitization to reality pains. But if you see all that violence on television, you get desensitized to violence in real life, because it all is real on television but not real on the street corner, unless it's reported on television. So people may be getting more and more desensitized as the population gets bigger, as the network, the information network, gets more and more dominant and takes over people's minds. And as that happens, people will be less sensitive to what's going on around them, and so waste products can be build up to poisonous levels without people noticing, because it's not really reported on the television, because television is owned by General Electric, which is making the waste products.
As an artist, are you addressing the collective unconscious?
Not at all.
Okay.
No collective unconscious. Don't believe in it.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out what I was just thinking. I'm not trying to address anybody. I'm trying to remember what I just thought. And I'm not trying to speak for anybody, except not even myself, because I don't know who that is, but I do remember my thoughts. So I'm just trying to keep an account of my thoughts.
Okay, so you think the collective unconscious doesn't exist?
I don't know whether it exists or doesn't exist. It's not my business. I'm not interested.
Okay.
I think it's a big bugaboo word that people like, if they don't believe in God, they'll use that as a way of, sentimentalizing the universe.
What do you mean by sentimentalizing?
The words are self-defining. Sentimental is when you grab onto it and you use it for your own ego purposes, so people will love you, pity you, or use it. Whereas actual feeling is there's no question.
Yeah.
It's acceptable and it feels good.
Yeah, but
It's just when you try and force it on people.
Yeah.
Push it in their face, and so that they'll like you or feel guilty that they don't respond, that they're not as high as you are in their sentimentality toward the flowers. then it gets to be obnoxious, or what Trungpa called spiritual materialism, which is probably what is mostly wrong with the whole New Age practice.
Yeah, could you say more about that?
No, it's based on, the New Age thing is based on a real ecological insight, certainly, that we're connected and the Earth is connected and there's a big karma going on and we're destroying species. But when it gets to hypersensitive sentimentality, with people going around waving a dress or clothing flag of woozy attachment to flower power, nature, good feeling, and are unable and unwilling to recognize their own aggression and their own insistency and their own power grab by using those symbols, then it gets to be double-edged sword.
But can you acknowledge the attempt to balance, to harmonize energies?
But I don't like the use of symbols. It mostly sounds like bad poetry, most of the time.
Well, but you accused yourself of writing bad poetry
Yes.
when you began too, you know,
Yeah.
so maybe this is an attempt. It's the
No, it's like gay poetry is a drag, because it's just about one subject. About black poetry is a drag, because it's just about that. Women's poetry is a drag, because it's about that. Male-dominated, oriented poetry is about that, macho. Who's interested in all those hang-ups? I mean, if it doesn't go beyond it with some sense of humor and, you know, like...
I agree, but doesn't it take a while to get
So earth sentimental poetry solely centered on that with emotion and not both emotion and some kind of practical grounding in humor, then it gets to be extreme, like most of the ecological poetry that you read about, oh, Mother Earth, they are attacking you. We must stop them. You know, by people who are turning on light bulbs all the time and driving their cars around and participating in the sucking up of oil as much as anyone else.
Yeah, but no one in this world is a pure specimen, so where does one begin?
The first thing I would say should begin with some kind of insight into one's own aggression.
Yeah.
And an accounting of that. You know, clarifying what's a genuine insight and what you're using for your own purpose.
Yeah. That takes a while, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it takes in 1 minute. You just got to agree, you know, like sort of have the insight that that's part of the scene.
And once we have an insight into our own aggression, you're saying then we...
Well, then I think it's a lot easier to get along with people and communicate with them. Because you won't be, you know, leaning on them, you know. You won't be finger pointing and saying, you're the trouble. Begin where you are, said Lord Palmerston, and dredge the harbor of Sligo. It's a little bit like think globally, act locally. Think universally, act personally. Or think cosmically, act earthbound. Earthborn. Cutting down population growth, ultimately, as the main problem. I think a lot of the other problems would be solved. Problems of aggression and expansion would be solved if people were thinking seriously about cutting down population. Problems of conservation would be faced. But the psychological problem, the inner psychological problem of wanting to expand your own empire is the first thing that everybody would be facing, and you might make a cultural virtue of that. You know, like get that in circulation as a daily practice. How do you do less, and it might solve some of the sex problems. You know, I think they're both in the direction of asceticism as well as free love, because it won't be attached to baby making.
These problems are overwhelming, even to people who have dedicated their lives to solving them. How does the average person who is raising a family, who might be working 2 or even 3 jobs, how do they begin to deal with these problems constructively? Do you have any suggestions?
No, I'm kind of baffled and stumped, like everybody else. I think everybody is kind of baffled and stumped, because almost everybody realizes the the sort of loss of the planet possibility, or almost certainty at this point. I think everybody knows about it, has heard about it, somewhat aware of it, and nobody knows how to deal with it because it's too big. It's taken 200 years to build up since the Industrial Revolution. This big, explosive, poisonous wastes, garbage problem. So I think everybody's aware of that. And just that awareness by itself is, I think, the first step. That there is a problem. It's like AA. First you got to admit you got a problem that's out of your control. Like Alcoholics Anonymous. And then having admitted it's out of your control, you give it over to higher power or something, not just your own manipulation, working with other people. And then there's not a higher power, just your own awareness maybe. Your own awareness that there is a problem altogether. It's the higher power. Then what do? What's the next step in AA, do you know?
Take a personal inventory.
Take a personal inventory, right. Of all the things that you've done right and wrong, and all the errors you've made and all the damage you've done. So an inventory would be next. That would be useful, and in very direct terms, an inventory of the damage we've done, and an inventory of the, let's say on the level of energy, literal energy like oil, an inventory of all the patents for clean energy, renewable sources, clean renewable energy sources that have been sequestered away in the shells of General Electric and Ford Motors and the power companies and the nuclear companies, all the little gimmicks that have been patented and then kept off from the public. There's thousands of such things that are snapped up and bought up and put away because they're competitive. Yeah. So an inventory, that'd be the second, that'd be the third step. I would maybe follow the AA pattern, like a 12-step thing. That might be a good way of going about it. And even even average man on the street knows about AA and has some idea of the 12-step thing, or can be told about that. That can be communicated. So that's one way of dealing with it. Addiction to power. Addiction to expansiveness, expansion. To physical, grabby expansion, aggressive expansion.